I want to introduce the Madison Police Chief, Noble Wray. Have a few things I can say about Noble is I've known him for many years. He served on the Governor's Task Force as well as chair of the Oversight Committee. And I believe being in this community for over 25 years, I know that he's been a leader in being maybe, if not the first, maybe the only police department that's led the way in doing racial data on traffic stops. So, and he's been doing that for many years and kind of has been leading the way in that in our law enforcement community. But I also can say he's a friend of mine, a colleague, kind of one of my Milwaukee homeboys, you know. So just have to let you know we're really proud of him and his accomplishments, and more so having the opportunity to work with him in the community. So Chief Wray, I know that's an unorthodox introduction, but that's it.
Well, good morning, and I will need a timekeeper. If someone would remind me, so I won't go over. First of all, thank you, Isidore, for the introduction. We go back a long way. We go back to St. Boniface, where Father Grappi was there, and so we go back a long way on that one. I was asked to do a number of things today, but more specifically, I think my role here is to provide some perspective and context to what has been referred to as the Governor's Task Force on Reducing Racial Disparities in the Criminal Justice System, where that sits right now. But before I do that, let me make a couple of comments, because I had the opportunity about 2 months ago to attend an executive session in Cambridge, Massachusetts at Harvard. And this was the group of people 25, 30 years ago that came together and coined the phrase community-oriented policing. So these are some high-powered folks out there, the leading people in law enforcement, leading researchers, community advocates, as well as some leading people from the grassroots level from policing. And what's interesting, what they were looking at is that what is the next step for law enforcement? That was the question. Should we move away from community policing? Should we go to another professional area of policing? And that was a debate. But what framed the discussion was this. We are at a point in time where, for the first time in decades, crime is at historic lows. For the first time in decades. We also, for the first time in decades, we do not have a national agenda on crime. There's no war on crime. There's no cry for 100,000 new police officers. There's no war on drugs. That's a national agenda. The third thing is that there's a tremendous strain on public sector resources. The upshot of that debate, because it was a debate, you had law enforcement researchers going back and forth, is that what we have been doing will not work. We cannot arrest our way out of this problem. And what we also know is that in the last 10 years, the evolution of, database decision-making in law enforcement and analysis and a whole host of things, evidence-based practices, that we can engage in other strategies that are effective that won't allow us to over-rely on the criminal justice system. Now, this came from law enforcement, the national law enforcement community. And so this morning, I wanted to start that out in saying that to this group here, that we are at a point in our history where we can deal with this issue. For 28 years, I have been looking at this issue from all different perspectives. From police department, from the national level, from the state level, and it has taken some time for us to really understand this complex problem, which will demand a complex solution. But the time is now. It is actually an exciting time to challenge ourselves to deal with this issue. Let me move quickly through what has been taking place, say, in the last, 10 years. Many of you may be surprised that Governor Doyle was not the first one that commissioned a task force on this issue. In fact, our last 3 governors have had a statewide task force on this issue. Both Governor McCallum and Governor, he escapes me now, Thompson, Governor Thompson, commissioned reducing racial profiles, reducing traffic stop data collection and racial profiling. They had a task force on that in the late 90s and early 2000. But Doyle's task force, which I co-chaired, was really the most comprehensive look at this issue. Right now, we don't have a statewide focus or statewide agenda, and I'll talk about that in a second. Very quickly, in 2008, we were asked to take a look at reducing racial disparities in the criminal justice system and determine whether discrimination is built into the criminal justice system at every stage from arrest through parole. The other charge was to recommend strategies and solutions to reduce the racial disparities in Wisconsin's criminal justice system. That was the charge of the commission, of the 26 commissioners that were made up statewide, both inside the criminal justice system and outside of the criminal justice system. The backdrop at that time, and make sure the backdrop at that time is that African Americans in 2008, the report comprises 6% of the overall Wisconsin population, but 43% of the prison population in facilities. Hispanics 4%, and overall 8% of the correctional population. That was a backdrop. That was kind of the driving kind of statewide issues, but the challenge with a statewide commission is that we're dealing with this from a state and local standpoint. The question was, well, how in the world did we get here? And we had a number of discussions across the state of Wisconsin, and this is a tool that I use to kind of frame out how complex the issues are on disparities, because it is more than just one issue that drives it. It is actual rates of offense. We know that there's variation between how certain populations commit crime, so actual rates of offense. It is repeat offenders. When you're dealing with the issue, you're going to have to focus on repeat offenders. It is social, economic, educational, a whole host of those issues. We do recognize that it's social, economic, both outside of the criminal justice system as well as inside of the criminal justice system, economics impact. It is unconscious bias, implicit bias. It's there. It is a driver, and we have to acknowledge it. We still have to acknowledge the conscious bias that exists. It does still exist out there. We can't move away from that. And then finally, it is understanding the impact of discretion throughout the criminal justice system, police discretion, discretion at the prosecutor level, discretion at the judicial level. And up at the top, I have up there, always to remind me, are the APEs. And the APEs are those driving factors that periodically cause us to do things that maybe we should reflect a bit more before we do them. And those are the acute political emergencies. Those are the APEs. And so the question is that with all of these things driving the disparity, as I refer to it as a disparity curve, it demands a complex response to this particular problem. Demands a complex response. When I first joined the Madison Police Department in the early 80s, I only thought of this issue as racism. That's the only way I thought of it. Never heard of racial profiling at the time, driving while black. Even the complexity of understanding issues related to disparities. But it's taken time to evolve to understanding that you have to have a response for the entire disparity curve. At least that was our challenge as a commission. The commission found that racial disparities within the criminal justice system are a serious problem that should be addressed regardless of whether they arise by chance or intentional discrimination. What the commission was saying with this is that even if you don't have discrimination, disparities in themselves impact your legitimacy, and you must address disparities. You must address disparities even though you have not concluded that racial discriminations exist. I can have the best relationship with the community in Madison, as a Madison Police Department, outreach and do all of those things, but if the disparities are still high, I have lost some legitimacy in certain communities. That's essentially what they were saying. And the number of citizens who spoke at public hearings or wrote to the commission offering perfect examples, they did. We went all across the state. And I have been in public hearings on this issue across the state of Wisconsin, all over the United States. And so the same issues keep coming up. And by the way, Ishmael was spot on. That commission report was nationally recognized, and a number of states have reviewed that commission's report. The commission's recommendations dealt with issues outside of recommendations outside the criminal justice system. There are recommendations for the juvenile justice. This was not just focused on the adult population, but primarily making recommendations on key decision points inside the criminal justice system for police, prosecutors, and public defenders here. More recently, let me go back here. Something I wanted to touch on right there. To give you a flavor, and by the way, the report is also, which was released in February '08, is also, you can also get that on the website at OJA. You can get the entire report. And I'm not going to go through all of the recommendations. There are 56 recommendations, as I mentioned, both in and outside the criminal justice system, and it was quite extensive. But you know, a lot of those recommendations you've heard things about. There was a recommendation for traffic stop data collection, recommendation to do training, more training, both not only in law enforcement, but entire criminal justice system, making sure that we are understanding of what does it mean to be culturally competent, and how can you look at things in a way that you can see them as, see, you talked about maybe what you don't know, you know, so it's really important. But there was a lot of emphasis placed upon making sure that both organizationally, statewide, and from a community standpoint, that we had the right tools in place to measure how we are doing. Moving forward, in recent months, in 2010, there were a number of things that took place in 2010. Just want to highlight really quick that were the offshoot of the Traffic Stop Data of the Racial Disparities Commission. And that is traffic stop data collection, which was approved. Now we think it's going to be not approved legislatively. But one of the things we're pretty excited about what happened in 2010, and Jerome Dillard was involved in that, is that we provided fair and impartial training for police officers, law enforcement executives across the state of Wisconsin. It was something that we did in 2008. Very extensive look at the issue of bias, implicit bias, et cetera. That took place in the state of Wisconsin. Roughly about 35 of the largest law enforcement agencies were involved in the state of Wisconsin. And then finally, one of the things that I think is really, really important to note, and that is, and it gives me an opportunity to thank the task force members, is that I've been talking about things at the state level. This will not move forward unless there is a locally based agenda with specific strategies that impact people locally, where you're held accountable locally. And so across the state, what we really would like to see, and we're seeing more of these justice councils across the state of Wisconsin that are taking up this issue. I believe at last count there are 32 justice councils, but probably one of the more impressive things, and I have to give kudos to it, to, again, Kathleen Falk in the task force, is that nowhere in the state of Wisconsin do we have a task force with specific recommendations to address this issue. Nowhere in the state of Wisconsin. That is impressive. We should definitely take advantage of that. And we should not let those recommendations fall by the wayside. Moving forward, here's something after being on the task force that, you know, people, I try to frame this issue for my own staff because you go from, well, Chief, we've got to maintain public safety. But Chief, we also have reducing racial disparities as a target. And so how do we reconcile that? Well, I think that there are 4 parts to this that you've got to have in the matrix. You have to maintain public safety. There's no 2 ways about it. But you can do this while reducing racial disparities in the criminal justice system. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But in order to achieve legitimacy, you have to work on, as a department, as an organization, as a member of the justice system, your entire infrastructure in developing fair and impartial policing. It goes back to hiring, recruitment, supervision, outreach, data collection, data analysis. That is how you create an organization of fair and impartial policing. But you can't do this without community involvement, community stakeholders. A community that is addressing this issue effectively, they have people that are involved in the community. It is not just the criminal justice system, but you also have to have all the criminal justice system partners at the table. And so it does take stakeholders. I think it is a matrix. If you are not dealing with all parts of this matrix, it's my experience, something's missing. And you won't be able to address this problem. Let me segue over really quick, because I'll be able to address some of these issues in the panel discussion. But let me just very quickly let you know where we are now. The commission's work, the original commission's work ended in 2008. We produced a report. We did not want that report to sit on the shelf. Governor Doyle decided at that particular time that we needed an oversight commission to bring this report to life. That commission started its work in the September of 2008. We have provided oversight to a number of those initiatives. Some of those initiatives, again, I won't get into all of them because there is also an updated report on the commission's work that is released through OJA. Some of them was a focus on Department of Corrections. It was already alluded to. What was going on with revocation? That was a driver. And the Ishmael Ozan was involved in that. They provided a report to the commission, and they provided a report to the Oversight Commission, and that was one of the things that the commission was doing. The other issue was to address with the Department of Transportation the need for a driver's license and or ID when you are released from prison. It's critical in so many different facets. The third, one of the other things that we did was, again, supporting the local efforts, and I talked about that. One of the other things that the commission supported by way of resolution was updating the eligibility standards for public defenders. It had not been updated since 1987. We heard that over and over and over across the state of Wisconsin that those needed to be updated. And then the other thing I mentioned was coordinating the training across the state of Wisconsin with law enforcement. There are other things that the Oversight Commission was involved in, and my partners in that were D.A. Chisholm, Jennifer Bias of the State Public Defender's Office, former Judge, he's my buddy, Martin, Judge Martin, and then myself. But one person I can't forget because, I mean, he's a mover and shaker on so many of these issues, and that's Lindsay Draper, who provided staff support on this one really quick. Let me summarize, because I know I'm probably getting close. Great. Dealing with being involved in this topic from so many different angles. As a father, as a police chief, as someone who believes, I firmly believe that this is the #1 criminal justice system issue in the United States. It is. We can start addressing this, you will address public safety. But in order to do that, and this is just kind of a sense from again, traveling both state, nationally, and dealing with my own problems here locally, there needs to be an attitude adjustment, specifically an attitude adjustment. Let me give you one attitude adjustment, that you can reduce racial disparities and maintain public safety. They are not mutually exclusive. As I talked about, there are evidence-based practices that are out there. We're seeing it all the time. You can do that. We get locked in and one of the speakers talked about this. We get locked in during elections. We get locked in when there's a high-profile incident, and we get paralyzed, and we run scared, and we won't think and strategize in the long term. And what takes precedent are the public safety issues. But they're not mutually exclusive. If we solve this one, we will deal with public safety. As I was growing up in Milwaukee, you know, one day I'm playing basketball in the alley and shooting around with my friends, and there was this guy who walked down the alley, and he walked up to us, and he wanted to play basketball, and someone whispered, I forget who it was, that this guy just got out of prison. And he looked strange to me. From that point forward, he looked strange to me. He looked different. Even though before then he did not look different. He really looked strange to me. But, you know, we let him play. We threw the football around, played basketball with him. And then we later on went to his house. And his father said he has paid his debt to society. Where did that go? When has someone paid their debt to society? From that point forward, after his father said that, I looked at him the way I looked at him before. He's been to prison, he's out, hey, you come play basketball. When is someone, when you talk to people on the street, those that are on probation, those that are sitting out there dealing with these issues on a daily basis, when have they paid their debt to society? When is it over? If you want to really get a more profound look at this, a sense of this, read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. Read the book. Jobs, housing, voting, CCAP is the new Facebook. When does it end? Now, I'm not standing here saying that, you know, you shouldn't pay your debt to society, you should go in and go out, and if you're still committing crimes, yeah, you should still be dealing. But if you're not dealing with it anymore, this is part of the problem. We must at some time have an attitude adjustment that someone has paid their debt to society, and there needs to be a demarcation of that, a sense of renewal for an individual. That's an attitude adjustment. The other attitude adjustment, and that is that those that are committing the crime need to take personal responsibility. There is a choice, and you have made a choice. I know right now that there is someone in Madison right now thinking, well, tonight, I'm going to rob the PDQ. That's a choice, and we have to call that out. But where we can call it out is where people are taking personal responsibility. If you have not had an opportunity to sit down when those young men are coming out of prison and listen to the conversations at Voices Beyond Bars, the things that Madison Urban Ministry and Dr. G are dealing with on a regular basis, you get the real sense of how vulnerable that population is, and they are struggling with a choice. That's the key time. That's the key time when we should help them with that choice. It is a choice. We know from things that are happening with our reentry initiatives that's supported by United Way and Madison Urban Ministry, it works. Evidence-based practices works. It definitely works. Okay, those are the three attitude adjustments. Let me get on to talk about some strategies that I think work really quickly here. One strategy is focusing on repeat offenders, and that is throughout. That is everything from traffic stop data collection, which we've learned, and Carlo was part of capturing that data, to also repeat offenders that we deal with on a regular basis. If you want to reduce the numbers, that's one of the first places you start. And start in a way with a carrot and stick approach that provides them with focused deterrence. I'll talk a bit more about that on the panel discussion. The second thing, and this is what we need here locally, we've got an implementation team that's working to try and move this thing forward. But we really do need people inside the criminal justice system and outside of the criminal justice meeting on an ongoing basis, doing three things. One, measuring the disparities. If you don't measure where they are, and you don't constantly have this as a focused agenda and alignment, you'll just keep producing the same old thing. That's one. Two, they need to identify local strategies to respond to those issues. And then three, focus on locally what's happening with discretion decisions along the criminal justice continuum, locally. Why is this happening here? Why is this happening there? We can't solve this in organizational silos. We need to get together at the table with all the criminal justice partners. And yes, I was one of those that had a hard time with Celia as well. But you need that level of agitation. You need that level of agitation. You need not only that level of agitation, but you need people at the table that are going to ask those very basic questions. Why is this happening this way? Why is this not happening that way? And measuring your results at each point in the criminal justice system. The juvenile justice system and reducing racial disparities in the criminal justice system, they do an excellent job utilizing the relative rate index and focusing in on those key decision points and finding out how they can have an impact on this issue. And that's something some of the people in the audience deal with. But those are the three things that the committee should do. Let me get down to the last thing, because someone alluded to this. This issue takes leadership. It takes guts. It takes a willingness to stand up and say, yeah, I understand all the issues with public safety, but we can deal with this in a smart, more effective way. You're seeing that across the state. This is smart public safety. That's what this is all about. It takes changing the paradox. I would love to have someone come up to me once and say, Chief, how are you doing with reducing the rates of disparity at the same time they're asking me about the crime rates? No one asks me about reducing the rates of disparity unless I'm in a group like this. But in a month or in a week or two, I will be releasing the crime rates, and everyone will be standing around looking for it. Leadership. But it takes leadership and, at every level. It takes a mayor, a county exec asking about those rates. It takes a community to ask about those rates. Are they important? What do they mean? How do we move those things forward? It takes me, it takes judges, it takes prosecutors to have a specific plan, not just the one that the task force put out, but Ishmael's going to have a plan, I'm assuming, specifically what he's trying to do. I've got to have a plan, and I've got to share that so people can hold me accountable for those things. Ishmael, Department of Corrections, everyone needs to have a specific plan. And finally, you have got to continue to focus on the numbers. Because, as I said, I can have a great relationship with the community. I can recruit, I can hire, I can discipline. I can do all of those things that are necessary for fair and impartial policing. But if we still are number 1, 2, or 3 in reducing racial disparities or having the disparities, we're going to have a problem with legitimacy. Thank you. I know that was fast. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to the discussion later on.